Okay, so good afternoon. Welcome to the University of Manchester Career Service webinar on interviews. And today we're going to be focusing on preparation and techniques. I have behind the scenes with me Jenny Sloan today. Jenny's going to be managing any student questions. I'll talk to you about how we can do that afterwards. My name is Penny Gordon-Lanes and I'm one of the careers consultants as part of the Career Service team. Just to make you aware, this session is being recorded today and will be available on the YouTube channel in the coming days. So if you want to review this again, you can, but also please do let your peers know that this session has taken place, and if they want to look at it, they can also access this as a resource. So I'm just going to share some slides with you today, and we've got a kind of couple of polls as well to do just to see how you're feeling about interviews. This is a really peak time of year now where we see lots of students applying for opportunities and taking part in that recruitment process, and interviews still seem to be very much favoured by employers as part of that process. So I'm just going to share some slides with you and talk you through some of the kind of content that we're going to cover today. So just to give you an overview of this session, we're going to look at why employers interview candidates, what's the purpose for them, coping with nerves, because it can be an anxious time for people when they're invited for interview, how to prepare, the types of questions that you might be asked, the types of interviews that exist, and the different types of interviews that you need to be aware of, the types of questions, and my colleague Jenny's going to kind of just take you through a few examples there to help you think about what you might be asked and how you might approach that in terms of a response. I'm going to come back on then and talk about common mistakes that we see with sort of people attending interviews and going through that process, and then just to highlight some of the support available today. So what I'd just like to do now is just ask you all a question. So I'm just going to share this poll with you, and I just want to get a sense of how you're kind of feeling right now at the beginning of this session in terms of, are you feeling pretty confident about your kind of knowledge of interview processes and what's involved, or are you very new to this and you feel like you've got a lot to learn? So if you just be kind enough just to answer, pick one of those options there. We're up to about 80% have responded, so I'm just going to give that another few seconds, and then I'll share the results with you just so you can see where we're at, where people are at in the audience. So just to say, we've got around 125 people joining us today, so just to give you a sense of the sort of number of responses that are coming in. And I'm just going to start to close that down now. So another 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay, that's great. So I'm just going to share those results with you actually, and just have just a really quick look at those. So sorry, I've just got a slight technical issue here. Okay, so we've got around 55% saying it's very limited in terms of their knowledge at the moment, 40% saying somewhat good, and perhaps some people have had interviews before, perhaps for part-time jobs or internships, and then we've got 5% saying very good. So that's great. So hopefully even those people that are feeling very positive and very knowledgeable, hopefully you'll still have some opportunity to learn today. Okay. Just want to check something else with you as well in terms of your confidence. So if you were invited for an interview, in the next few days, how confident would you feel about attending that interview and in terms of your preparation, in terms of knowing about the company, knowing what type of interview it might be, and how you might tackle that? So let's have a look at confidence levels around attending interviews at the moment. So we're about up to about 80%. I'm just going to give that another few seconds just to give people a chance to respond. Okay, and I'm just going to close that now. Thank you so much for voting. And I'm just going to share that with you as well. So There's around 50%, 54% that are not confident for whatever reason at this stage. They're not confident about attending an interview. 44 is somewhat confident, so that's great. So someone where you have some idea of what to expect, and maybe some of the preparation you need to do beforehand. And then 3% are saying extremely confident. So that's really great. We've got some people who are feeling, extremely confident about going into this sort of experience. So that's great. Thank you. So what I wanted to do now is just go through a few slides and just to kind of cover some of the kind of information that we want to share with you today. So why do employers interview? So it's an integral part of an application process. Employers get a chance to meet you and figure out if you're going to fit into their organisation. But it's also a chance for you to meet them and see if it's where you want to work. And every organisation is different, so it is important that you both feel that you're the right fit for them and they're the right fit for you. Interviews also give you the opportunity to provide evidence beyond your CV or the application form that you might have filled. And this gives you a chance to prove that you've got the skills, whether that's personal, practical, technical, often commercial, having commercial awareness, knowledge and experience. And they get a sense then of the kind of skills that you're bringing to the company if they offer you the role. One of the kind of earlier stages of the process, you've got your interview, and the second thing that typically happens after you're excited and you tell your friends and family is nerves. Okay, so nerves quite often kick in at this stage. So I'm just sorry, I just realised my just make sure I'm sharing my screen. Thank you. So yeah, coping with nerves. This is one of the biggest challenges for some people to overcome. So this is, just to say, it's absolutely natural to feel nervous about going into a situation where people are going to be firing questions at you. So it's just thinking about you and your kind of well-being, but just being really prepared as well. So before you kind of even venture down that route of going to the actual company or the site. And what I will mention is a lot of interviews at the moment are video interviews. So having a practice interview or getting familiar with the software that the company might be using is really important. So plan, be prepared. If you are going on site for an interview, make sure you know how to get there, and obviously try and get there in plenty of time. Some people find breathing exercises really helpful, or some sort of gentle meditation just to kind of, help you feel calm, relax your breathing. Your breathing has a massive impact in terms of your anxiety. So if you can regulate your breath or do some sort of calming exercise, something like Tai Chi or meditation can really help actually. When you do arrive or before you actually sit down and do your interview, make sure you're feeling fresh, that you're feeling composed, and that you are ready to go. And it's also important to mention just having good posture and a smile. Sitting up straight if you're sitting in a chair can actually really affect the way you breathe, the way you come across. It can make you come across as more confident. So they're all really helpful kind of areas of preparation to consider. So how to prepare? Let's have a look at what's next. How to prepare. So in terms of the actual interview, it's really important, if you can, to try and access some practice interviews and get some feedback. Now you can do this with the career service. We have a mock interview simulation that you can book. It's a 30-minute appointment, and one of our consultants will go through a series of questions with you and then give you feedback on your responses. It's really important as well to be really familiar with the job description and the person specification, because quite often employers will use this to frame their questions. So if you're familiar with what's expected in terms of the role, in terms of the potential responsibilities, that will really help you kind of prepare those answers. So this is about anticipating what they're going to ask. Ascertain what the employer is looking for, and again, there'll be information on their website. They may have sent you an information pack. Think about what it is that they're looking for and try to get that point across, that express that you are that candidate, that ideal candidate. I mentioned already about anticipating possible questions, and these could be either technical or non-technical, depending on your discipline. So I work a lot in the Faculty of Science and Engineering, and most of the students I work with have some sort of technical interview or technical questions, at least as part of their interview process. And we've also got competency-based questions. We'll talk a little bit more about what these are later. But with these, we do recommend you use the STAR technique. Hopefully, most of you will be familiar with STAR. So this is a framework to help you answer a question in an interview situation. So it's looking at the situation that you were in, the task that you had to achieve, the action that you took as an individual, whether that's part of a group or by yourself, and then the result. What was the outcome of that piece of work or that experience? Okay, I mentioned just briefly before, there are different types of interviews and there are quite often different stages with different employers. So some employers might have 4, 5, 6 stages to their recruitment process. That could include an application form, a CV, a cover letter, some sort of assessment, perhaps a psychometric test. So it can vary from business to business, but typically in terms of interviews, where you are invited to more than one, so the first interview that usually takes place, I've just highlighted there, is usually 30 to 60 minutes, typically with someone from HR and or a hiring manager, so someone who is kind of going through that first stage. They're typically asking questions about information you've already provided. If you are successful and you are invited to a second interview, which is quite common, this will be a little bit more specific now, and they'll be looking for evidence. They've decided that you're probably a good fit for the organisation, but they just need that evidence now to say, yeah, you are right for us. So this is where you're going to be giving lots of examples and telling them how you problem solve, etc. Okay. In terms of the types of interviews, so I've just sort of touched on this, there are various stages and there are different types of interviews, but the ones I just want to focus or highlight today is telephone interviews are becoming very, very popular, particularly during the pandemic. We're seeing lots of interviews taking place initially over a telephone, quite often followed by a video interview. Now, sometimes these are live interviews, so there is a person there speaking to you through a webcam, but sometimes they're recorded and you answer a series of questions as to what the company is looking for. I will touch on these later as well. We've got a good resource for that. Panel interviews, so these are usually face-to-face, but again, at the moment, under the current circumstances, a lot of these are taking place online. And sometimes you'll be invited to a case study interview, and you might do that as part of a team, or looking at a business problem for the business, and they'll set you a task and you work through that case study. Okay, there are different types of questions, and I touched upon this before when I mentioned competency. So the type of questions you might be asked in an interview typically fall into one of these categories. You might be asked a mixture of biographical, competency, motivation and commitment questions. So sometimes they'll use a combination of these types of questions, but alternatively, they might just focus, if it's a very technical interview, they might just focus predominantly on technical questions. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to hand over to Jenny, who's going to look at some examples with you and think about how you might respond to those.
Great, thanks Penny. Hi everyone, my name is Jenny Sloan and I work with Penny in the Career Service. And as Penny said, I'm going to take you through a couple of example questions. So the first one we have here is biographical interview questions. Employers will often start interviews with maybe 1 or 2 biographical questions in relation to your application. So they may ask for more information about, for example, your extracurricular activities, and crucially, what you gained from these experiences that make you an excellent candidate for the role. So, as you can see, an example of a biographical interview question would be, what extracurricular activities are you currently involved in? What have you learned about yourself from your involvement in these? It's important to remember that the panel aren't just asking these questions to find out what you've been up to, because you've probably already mentioned this somewhere in your application or your LinkedIn profile. But biographical questions are also asked to ascertain your level of self-awareness. So a good answer to a biographical question is one that's backed up sufficiently with detailed evidence. So instead of listing off your extracurriculars, you could choose one or two specific examples that you feel best showcase your suitability for the role, and go into detail about your involvement, your accomplishments, and any relevant transferable skills gained from these experiences. Biographical questions are a great way of highlighting your positive qualities, whether these are well-developed skills like teamwork or leadership, or maybe attributes like motivation, resilience, drive, or creativity. So if we go on to the next slide, thank you. So next we have competency-based questions, and these are really popular with student and graduate employers. So they're designed to test one or more skills or competencies, usually from the list of essential skills listed on the person specification for the specific role that you're applying for. So examples of skills or competencies could include communication, problem solving, adaptability, organisation, teamwork, and conflict resolution. So you'll see on the screen here a few examples of competency-based questions. It's really important that you answer these questions in the context of your experience, and this is where your STAR technique comes in that Penny was talking about earlier. So STAR, situation, task, action, result, is a really great way of structuring your answers to these types of questions, and by following the STAR method of answering, you'll ensure that you communicate relevant points as clearly and concisely as possible. So, for example, if we use the STAR technique for the first question, so you would start with S for situation, and this is all about setting the scene for the panel. What was the context of your specific example? Then you would move on to T for task, which describes what your desired outcome or goal was, and crucially, what you needed to do as the leader of that group. For action, that's the A, you would explain how you carried out this responsibility. So what actions did you take to work towards a resolution or an end goal, and how do these actions portray how you effectively led others? So think about what skills you used. Finally, you've got the result, where you describe the outcome of your actions. Particularly, sometimes it can be quite easy with these type of questions to focus on what you did as a group, and while that's important, it's important to also look at the question. So the first question here asks specifically what you did in leading others. If you have any questions as we go through these types of questions, remember to use the question and answer box, and myself and Penny will pick them up at the end. So if we move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. We've got motivation and commitment questions. So these types of questions usually assess your commitment and your knowledge about the career routes available with the employer. So they look at the level of research that you've undertaken prior to the interview. Strong answers to these questions are ones in which you discuss the company values and how these align to your own values. So if you look at the sorts of questions here, why do you want to work for us? Why are you interested in this role? Why have you applied for the job? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? I guess it's almost clear from the types of question examples that we have on screen, but it's always important to focus on the why. So you might want to work for a large multinational organization. That's great, but why is this important to you? Why do you want to work for that sort of organization? Is it maybe the opportunity to progress, to experience new areas within the organization through rotational placements or secondments, or maybe your desire to work abroad? Conversely, perhaps you're applying for a job with a startup or a small or medium-sized business. Why do you want to work for this organization? Is it something about their particular values or their ethos or their way of working that appeals to you? Is there a smaller workforce, and does this appeal to you because you're able to have more responsibility and hit the ground running, for example? So always have a look at the company website and do your research in preparation for these types of questions, because they always seem to come up in interviews. You can often find a whole wealth of information on the About Us pages of the company website, where you'll find more information about their values and their culture. And you can also have a look for any recent news stories about them, perhaps a recent accolade that they've been awarded, or funding that they've been granted, or maybe a project that they've been involved in. And you can do this just through Googling the organisation. So when you're asked about your interest in the role or why you applied for this particular job, think back to the job description and talk about a particular aspect or aspects of the job description that really enticed you to apply for the role. Consider the responsibilities of the role and how these match to your skills, interests, and what you enjoy doing, and communicate these in your answers. So if we move on to commercial awareness questions now, thank you. So commercial awareness questions are very common, but unfortunately students and graduates can often fall down at this stage. Commercial awareness is more than a type of question. It's a transferable skill that is often a requirement for many placements, graduate roles, and even part-time jobs. But what is it? It can be a little bit complicated to understand at first. Put simply, commercial awareness is an understanding of the industry and the marketplace in which the company operates, and it affects the way that you work, your performance, and any decisions you make in that job. So it is likely that you'll be asked at least one question testing your commercial awareness, especially given the current circumstances of Brexit and the pandemic. So it's important that you prepare. A strong answer to this type of question will be structured and supported with evidence. And the easiest way to prepare is to research your chosen industry. So if you look online and research the range of products and services that the company provides, for example, that's a good way of researching in preparation for commercial awareness questions. You can also have a look at their competitors and look maybe at the risks associated with the work that they do. Think about who their clients are, or their customers, or who they help, and what are the needs of these clients or customers. Maybe have a think about what legislation might be relevant or have an impact on the company or the sector, and that's sort of when Brexit could come in your research there, or any other sort of political or social movements. And then finally, think about current events and trends that might be important, for example, the current pandemic. There are lots of websites and blogs and LinkedIn profiles and journals that you can follow or subscribe to that will help you gain a deeper understanding of the organisation and the industry in which it operates. So definitely do your research on the web. So next, we've got technical and specialist questions. These, again, are really, really common, as Penny said, if you're applying for a technical role, and many of these types of questions have a specific correct answer. These types of questions are likely to be industry specific, and they're asked to test not only your knowledge and experience, but also your ability to apply and adapt this knowledge and experience. So an example might include, tell me more about some of the interesting or difficult problems you've been working on the past few years. With this, it's important to remember that you should describe your problem-solving process and the logic you've used to arrive at your answer, as well as the answer itself. There are some cases when technical or more specific interview questions have several answers that could be correct, and that's possible. However, the same structure applies. Talk the interviewers through your problem-solving process and the methods that you would employ to tackle the problem. Next, we have situational questions. Thank you. So this is when you're asked specific questions about how you would handle certain circumstances at your job if you're successful. So these ask you to assess a situation and provide solutions on how you would handle it. You'll know if you get a situational question because they tend to start with, what would you do if X happened, like you can see on screen. The example that we have here is, what would you do if you were asked to perform a task that you have never done before? These types of questions are designed to test your understanding of the role and how you behave in certain circumstances. But don't worry too much, because employers don't usually ask them with the expectation that you would know exactly how an organisation works in every circumstance and exactly what you would do in a specific situation, because of course there's training involved in every single role. Nevertheless, think about the situation that you're presented with and try your best. What is your evaluation of the circumstances with your current level of knowledge and experience, and what logical steps would you take, bearing in mind your research of the company and the role? Lastly, remember to consider what could happen as a result of your actions and how you would respond to the potential consequences. Okay, so finally, we're on to strengths-based questions. And these are different to competency-based questions because they concentrate on what you're good at, what you enjoy doing, and what energizes you as an employee, instead of what you can do or what you've done in the past. Some employers use competency-based questions, others adopt a more strengths-based approach, and others still employ a mixture of the two when interviewing candidates. So you'll see a couple of examples of strengths-based questions on the screen, including, how do you make sure you always do your best? Examples of strengths-based questions I've personally been asked in past interviews have looked like, well, what does the last 30 minutes of your day look like? Or how do you effectively prepare for an important meeting? These sort of strength-based questions can be difficult to prepare for, but one of the ways to prepare is to reflect on your own strengths. So how do you do this? You reread your application, you review your skills, and you look for evidence which you could use to demonstrate your strengths. Also think about your natural talents, because they can be quite easy to overlook because they come to you so easily. You might even not notice, not even notice that you have them. So perhaps you could ask friends or family what they think you're good at, and they might notice things that you excel in, which you maybe take for granted. And we have absolutely loads of resources on our website to help you get started thinking about your strengths, as well as some personality indicator questionnaires. And you can find out more by scanning the QR code on the screen. Another thing to remember when it comes to strength-based questions is that they're generally asked at a quick pace, and combined with your body language and tone of voice, they're used to sense your energy, engagement, and therefore, by default, your strengths as well. So if we could go over to the next slide, please. So the last thing I'd like to chat you through before I hand back to Penny is questions for the employer. So one of the last questions an interview panel will ask you is, do you have any questions for us? And one of the worst things you can say is, no, I'm all right, thanks. I often speak with students and graduates who forget to prepare for this part, but it's really important. By using the opportunity to ask the employer questions, you can increase your knowledge about the role and the company, which will help you to make a decision about whether they're the right fit for you. However, the questions you ask the panel also let the interviewers know that you've put in the research and the work into your interview preparation. So you'll find a range of questions on the screen, ranging from questions about the role and the company, and more practical questions about the recruitment and selection process. You can also direct questions to specific members of the panel if you've done your research on who's on the panel, and this is a good way of finding out more about their experiences of working in the organisation. So if you have any questions, remember to stick them in the question and answer box, and myself, Penny, will look at them at the end. But in the meantime, I'll pass back over to Penny.
Thank you very much, Jenny. So what I wanted to cover now are just some of the common mistakes that we see, that we hear from employers about sort of people approaching the interview process. And some of these might seem really obvious to you, and some of them you might actually be shocked that people behave in particular ways. So, for example, not preparing questions for the employer, which Jenny has just covered, is a really important aspect. It shows the employer that you've actually thought about, the role, you've thought about your future with the company, and it also expresses that you're interested in working for that particular organisation. But it does happen, students do go to interviews, and when asked that question, they do say no, so please avoid doing that. There are other sort of more body language things like, avoiding eye contact, fidgeting. It's really important that you come across, confident, self-assured, and that will come when you have done your research, when you feel really prepared and you're in that kind of state of mind where you feel really, prepared for the interview, prepared for the potential questions you'll be asked. So all of that confidence really does come from the work that you put in before you step in that room or before you click the kind of login button on the video interview. It's important to mention dress. So in different sectors, it's absolutely fine to be more casual and just kind of wear your sort of normal day wear, but there are industries where it is expected that you will dress formally, professionally and smartly. So it's always worth kind of doing a bit of research around this and making sure that you're dressing appropriately. I have seen students sit on interviews with headphones around their neck, earbuds in. It's just not appropriate unless you're using it for the interview. Get rid of any kind of clutter or paraphernalia that's around. So make sure you're nice and presentable and you're focused on that interview. Smiling's another big one. Again, it's can be quite an anxious experience for some people, but try and smile naturally if you can. You will have seen this before, on interviews or on the internet where people kind of force a smile and it's just a little bit uncomfortable. And just try and be as natural. When you're thinking about your voice as well, try to be enthusiastic, use good intonation, and really try and engage the employer to make sure they know you're really interested and you want this role. Lack of knowledge is a really key one, actually. So people just don't look at things like the values, which I know Jenny mentioned before. It's really important to know the business that you're going to be interviewing for, that you understand their customers, their services, their products, whatever it is that they do. So do make sure you know about that before you actually sit in front of them and they start asking you questions about that. Some of the ways that you can kind of find out this information is obviously on their company websites. You can see the kind of images that they're showing as well on their website. So if you're seeing, an office full of people that are professionally dressed in suits and sort of professional workwear, you can get a sense, okay, that's what the office environment, is like. I think if ever in doubt, go for professional, smart workwear. Just as a kind of good safe backup option. Okay, what I want to do now actually is just kind of check in with you and see how you're feeling, because we've shared a lot of tips, a lot of advice. Jenny's gone through some really good examples there of questions that you could well be asked in an interview situation. So I just kind of want to get a sense of where you're at the moment. So I'm just going to do a really quick poll and just see if things have changed for those people. So just looking at, has your knowledge changed now? Has it improved from the beginning of this session? So if you would just answer that for me. There's two answers there you can choose from. So you can just vote and let me know what you're feeling at the moment, if you feel like it has improved or if it's pretty much stayed the same. I know we had some really confident people who felt they were really sort of familiar with the process of interview, the preparation. And some of those may have shifted, but hopefully most people have gained something from the session. So we're up at around 82%. So I'm just going to close that there and just share that with you. So we've got around 83% of people saying that they feel they've improved since just the beginning of this session, around sort of 35 minutes ago. And 17 are sort of around the same point. What I would say, don't feel that this is it. There's so much more now you can go away and do and take action on. And in fact, one of the things that you do have access today, in fact, immediately after this session, is my colleague Amanda in the career service is running a session on psychometric tests. And this is quite a common part of an interview, a recruitment process. So if you've never done one before, or you want to get a refresher on that, it's definitely worth joining the webinar which is taking place after this one. And that's listed on the events page on the Career Service website. Talking of resources, there's a couple of things I just wanted to highlight. So we have got, Jenny again mentioned before, we've got some really excellent resources on the Career Service webpage. There's some really great tips and advice, there's videos. We do also have our YouTube channel, so there's lots of resources on there. In terms of recorded interview practice, so this is typically where you film yourself answering questions. So the employer will typically put up anything between, I don't know, 8 and 10 questions, possibly longer, asking you some of the questions that Jenny's already covered actually, things like why do you want to work for the company? Tell us about a time when, what do you consider your strengths to be? Yeah, those sorts of questions, but they are all written down. So typically you read these questions and then you respond to them via a recording. So there is a resource that we pay for. It's a licensed product through Graduates First, and this gives you that experience. And anyone that's done an interview and done it for real usually thinks, oh, I wish I'd have practiced that first because I just didn't know what to expect. So I really do encourage you to have a look at that resource. It's on the website, QR codes there that will take you straight to the resource. You can log in with your university details, and there's also some really great stuff in there around psychometric tests and situational judgment tests. There's lots of really good resources on that website. You can also book a one-to-one live video interview. So again, I mentioned this right at the beginning. So a careers consultant will arrange a video interview with you and talk you through, potential questions that you might be asked as part of your interview. In order to make the most of that, we would need to know the job role that you're being interviewed for. So if we can get a copy of the job description, the person specification, we can get a sense and try to anticipate some of the questions you might actually be asked in the interview, and of course just give you some feedback in terms of how you're responding. We do have Sonru. Now this is software that's used by a lot of companies. Again, this is recorded video interviewing, so you can arrange a mock recorded video interview. We have a limited number of licenses for this, so basically if you want to use Sonru, you have to have been invited to a video interview to access that. Okay, so you can't just book that in. You have to have been invited to a real interview before you can access that resource. Graduates First, you can go on at any time. That's not a problem. And then finally, I just mentioned before, the University Career Service YouTube channel. We've got a video on there actually, which is really helpful around video interviews and how to tackle them. So again, the QR code is there for you to access. So there are lots of resources out there. And try to just access as much support as you can before you step in that room or go online to do your interview. I think we've pretty much reached the end now. I know we've had questions coming through, so I'm just going to go back to Jenny now and just have a look at some of those questions that were submitted.
Yeah, absolutely. We have loads of questions, which is great. So thank you so much for everyone who sent in a question. There's still time. So if there's anything that you would like to ask more detail or anything that you feel that we've missed, please do use the question and answer function in the toolbar to your right to ask any questions. So I'll go through a couple of them now. So someone has asked about how to prepare for unexpected online interview questions, either pre-recorded or live. So this particular person has done some, but some questions that they had to answer were really unlike any example that they've ever given or they've ever seen. So they asked about the best way to prepare for questions that you weren't expecting. So Penny, is there anything you'd like to add, and I can add in my 2 pence afterwards?
Yeah, sure. I mean, any kind of interview is going to be a little bit unexpected, and employers will sometimes throw curveballs, just to test to see how you respond to sort of being under that pressure. I mean, in terms of the types of questions, I think we've pretty much covered the kind of types of questions that you would typically find in an interview situation. What I would say though, in addition to that, is if you have a contact at that company, so if you are able to connect with someone, and I would suggest somewhere like LinkedIn or My Manchester Network, if you can connect with someone who's recently been through the recruitment process, so potentially a recent placement student or intern or a recent graduate, it might be worth trying to connect with them to see if they've got any tips. What I find is people are quite generous with their advice and their support, particularly if they've got the connection of having been a kind of University of Manchester student, or if they're alumni, for example. So I would say, in terms of questions, I think we've covered most, well, as far as I'm aware, most of the types of questions that you would expect to find. But you could also go that extra step and find out from someone who's been in that position recently and ask them if they would be willing to share any advice or tips.
Yeah,
Jenny, did you have something to add?
Yeah, just to echo what Penny said, really. And also, if there is a question that comes up, don't panic. As Penny said, there's always an element of surprise to most interviews, really. And you don't have to answer straight away. You can take a breath, you can take a sip of water, you can say, oh, great question, can I have a couple of seconds to think about that? All of that is totally fine. Interviewers know that you can't prepare 100% for every possible question that could be asked, but do take your time to formulate a well-structured answer as well as you can, and don't panic about having to respond within the second that they ask it. So the question we've got here is about company values. So this person has mentioned that a lot of companies tend to have quite generic values. So how can they be more specific about their motivation to work at that particular company while still incorporating their values into their answer?
Yeah, I think what I would say to that, it is important to align your values to theirs as an organisation, as long as that's true. So if, for example, a company is very passionate about sustainability, for example, and that's something that you are equally passionate about, you could in fact, reference some of the work that they've done around that. So if they've done undertaken projects in the community, you could reference how, what impact you think that might have had, or how that's important to you. So you're still aligning your values to theirs, but actually maybe talking about some of the work that they have undertaken could give you some extra ticks, because that demonstrates you've actually researched and looked into what they're doing with their sustainability agenda, or corporate social responsibility agenda, for example.
Absolutely.
Jenny, did you?
Yeah, I think just as Penny said there's always a way to make it more specific. So while companies may have 4 or 5 values that seem quite generic, you can always link them back to what they're actually doing to evidence and progress those values and to live those values in their company. So as Penny said, look for more specific things about projects they've worked on, or maybe some articles about them in the news, or any funding or grants that they've received, or awards or accolades that demonstrate their commitment towards those values, because they'll be company specific, while also aligning their values to your own values. Absolutely. So the next question that we have, do we have any extra tips when applying for jobs in academia? And actually we can link 2 questions together, really. Also, does this advice that we covered about interviews also match interviews for academic positions or research positions in academia?
Yes, I would say absolutely. A lot of the principles apply. I guess what I would say is about the world of academia is, most people know each other, or you can quite easily find out, who's working in a particular institution or department. So in terms of your preparation there, it's understanding you know, who's in that department, what work or projects they're working on currently, and just getting really familiar with that and how your expertise can, you know, contribute to the team that are already sort of in place. The other I guess aspects with academia, they sometimes can be exclusively research or teaching roles. Quite often it's a combination of both, but of course, if there is that differentiation in the kind of job role specifically, the way you would be, the kind of examples you would be giving would relate to whether it was more research focused or more focused on kind of teaching and learning. So in terms of the kind of process, yes, it's you know, it is the same in terms of that preparation and researching who you're going to be working for, but also who you would be working with, I think is probably, you know, an additional step you could take here, to demonstrate how your expertise would fit in with that team. Jenny, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, I think, yeah, as Penny said, it with applying for academic positions, your research has the opportunity to be a lot more focused, as Penny said, depending on what the element of research would be, or what the research project is, or if it's teaching. So in terms of the process, the preparation process for the interviews, it would be the same, but it would require perhaps a sort of like a deeper understanding of the specific research project or what you would be teaching. So your research would have to be a lot more focused, I'd imagine. So the next question is, when asked if we have any questions at the end of the interview, would you advise asking a generic question or a question in relation to the organisation? And how many questions would you advise that we ask?
So my response to that is, it sort of depends what you've already been told. So if you feel like you've been given, you know, good information from the organisation about what they do, who they are, about the role, etc., you may feel like you have that answer to that question already. So I would probably avoid generic questions if you've already been given the information, because it might suggest you've not read what you've been given. So just be careful with that. I think in terms of the number of questions, I think 2 or 3 is absolutely satisfactory. What you don't want to do is sort of elongate the interview too much, but you do also want to come across as being interested, motivated. So I think 2 or 3 questions is usually what I would recommend. Would you agree with that, Jenny, or would you advise more or less?
No, absolutely. I would totally think that 2 or 3 would be perfect. And I think, as you said, they're really, like, it is important to ask these questions, but remember, don't ask questions just for the sake of them. Make your questions count. So think about, is there anything that you genuinely want to know? And also think about who you're asking the questions to. Perhaps do your research on LinkedIn, and really this question, although it's an opportunity for you to ask questions, it's also an opportunity to impress the panel with the research that you've already done by asking really good, strong questions. So the next question, okay, this is quite specific. How do you prepare questions for the employer in the legal sector? I feel I cannot be as generic, and I find it hard to make one up. I would imagine it would just be surrounding research and really researching the type of role you're going into within the legal sector and the organisation that you're going into. But what would you say to that, Penny?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And we do actually have a specialist actually at the university called Bernadette Lyons. So it's worth reaching out to her. She is on LinkedIn. So it's Bernadette Lyons, Lyons. She's probably best placed to support you with that, I would suggest. She has worked in the legal sector as well in terms of recruitment. So she's in a really good position to support with that. There is some advice and tips on the career service website as well. But I guess the other thing, which I mentioned before, is LinkedIn, you know, reaching out to people who are in that field, particularly, you know, recent graduates, or if you're looking at placement opportunities or contracts, reach out to people that have recently sort of joined companies, so that you have got a sense of, you know, what they've asked, what the process has been for them. So use your network.
Absolutely. And the next question we might have already covered. If you've not encountered a question that, if you have encountered a question that you've not prepared for, is there a technique to improvise and answer appropriately? We probably already covered that in the sense that, you know, that all sorts of questions, you know, you can never predict all of these questions 100%, but if you have done practice and prepared for the types of questions that we have already discussed, you should be well placed to be able to formulate an informed answer, and remember to you know, practice deep breathing and don't feel that you have to answer straight away. But is there anything that you'd like to add to that, Penny?
Yeah, so I think, you know, maybe try and buy yourself a little bit of thinking time. So quite often you'll be offered some sort of liquid refreshment in the interview. So, you know, take a drink of that, process the question in your head. You could potentially ask for them to repeat the question. There's a little bit of risk in that they might think, well, why haven't you taken it the first time? But if you're really panicking, it could buy you those few extra seconds to formulate a response in your head. So definitely the drink of water is a good tactic. Give you a few seconds to think about how you're going to respond. And if you feel comfortable and you feel it's appropriate, you could ask them to repeat the question again, just to give you those few extra seconds to think.
Absolutely. And the next question is it's quite a good position to be in. So when you have been given multiple offers after interviews at different times, what is the appropriate thing to say, and how much time can you ask for to accept the offer?
It's a really tough one. It's really tricky. And I mean, all I can do there really is share with you what other students have done. So typically, if you are in a position where you've had multiple offers, you know, a lot of the employers understand that you are applying for multiple roles and are sympathetic to a degree, so they understand that you might be in that position where you're offered multiple roles. I think in terms of timescales, you don't want to keep them too long. So, you know, if you can negotiate a kind of time frame, you know, if you propose, I don't know, say 2 weeks, and they come back and say, well, actually, we'll give you a week, you know, then they're still giving you that time. It may not be as long as you want it to be, excuse me, but I think be honest, actually, and just say, look, you know, I just need some more time to think about this, and just try and negotiate that extra bit of space until you have made up your mind. I mean, you're right, Jenny, it's a really good position to be in. And of course, as part of that decision making, you'll need to really think about what's right for you if you've got those multiple offers. But I think be careful as well, because employers do talk to each other. And, you know, if you are seen to be delaying too much or not committing, it can impact on your reputation. So you need to do it very diplomatically, is what I would suggest.
Absolutely, I totally agree with that, because at the end of the day, these are people too, and they want people to join their team, and they have timelines to work towards and paperwork to fill out. So just sympathetic as well, and be diplomatic as possible. Our next question is, we've got another question here, which it's important not to be late, but how early is too early to arrive for an interview? That's a good question.
Yeah, gosh, not been asked that before. I'd say definitely no more than half an hour, you know, because potentially they're already interviewing another candidate before you, or they will be prepping. So if you're the first interview of the day, they'll be kind of prepping their kind of strategy as a panel or whatever. So definitely no more than half an hour, absolute maximum. I'd say 10 to 15 minutes is probably good. So you know, typically you have to go and alert someone that you've arrived, a receptionist or something. So with video interviews, it is different. There is there is an expectation that you will be there at the time that has been arranged. So showing up half an hour early for that, I would discourage that. A few minutes early, a bit like today, some people had logged on for this webinar sort of 5 or 10 minutes beforehand. That's absolutely fine. So it shows you're ready to go when they go live, but half an hour is probably a bit of a stretch. And I'm sure you've got better things to do with your time.
Absolutely, you can use that time to brush up and to for some last minute preparation. Okay, so next question is, do employers expect 100% self-assurance and confidence, or are they understanding of the fact that who they are interviewing will be nervous? Can nerves go against you?
Yeah, I think, you know, they understand you're human beings at the end of the day. And I think, you know, hopefully if you've got good panel members who are experienced, they will be allowing for that. So, you know, a lot of good employers that I've worked with, and I've taken this approach myself, is, you know, you try and open up an interview with a question that the candidate feels comfortable asking, you know. So it could be something like, you know, how was your journey here today? Or did you have any technical issues joining the interview? Yeah, so you're sort of asking them a question that they can easily respond to. So good kind of panelists, good interviewers should hopefully manage that process really well and make you feel comfortable. Of course, you may feel a little bit of anxiety. It's an unusual situation. You are being judged, and with that brings, you know, some concern. But I think, in my experience and having worked with, you know, lots of students over lots of years, it's very rare that you hear about a bad experience, you know. So I think just try and be positive. And I think if you do face that situation where you feel uncomfortable, you know, just perform to your absolute best. You know, just try and stick to what you want to achieve. Answer the questions as kind of concisely and eloquently as possible, and you be professional. Yeah, that would be my advice around that, Jenny. What about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just to reiterate what you've said, you know, the interview panelists are people too, and we've all been there. You know, they've had to do interviews to get the roles that they're in at the minute, and they'll remember how nerve-wracking it can be. One way of doing that, sort of calming your nerves and to feel a bit more confident, is preparation and practice and research. There's no substitute for it. So really do make the most of all the support services available, from Sunroot to Graduates First to interview simulations, and do your research. And we have a really good page on the website about how to research employers and jobs effectively. So definitely just research, prepare and practice as much as possible, and that should help you feel as confident as you can be. But no, absolutely, every panel will expect a certain degree of nerves, don't worry. So this question is from a graduate, and they're asking about if they've graduated a while ago and they've forgotten things that they've learned from technical answers. What's the best way to find out what types of potential technical questions they could be asked in this category?
Yes, I think it's worth, again, sort of connecting with people in that field. So I don't know if that person's still got peers that are working in those fields that they're looking to go into, but that would be my first port of call, just to kind of refresh the kind of, you know, if there were particular programs or technical equipment that you use as part of your role, or particular approaches that, you know, that you would use. So reaching out to sort of people in that field. But I think using the career service website, you know, we've got some really good resources on there. And if you are alumni within the 2-year period of graduating, you can still access Graduates First. So you can just log on with your details, and you should be able to access. There's all sorts of things on there around psychometric tests, the interview stuff that I mentioned before. So that could be a really good resource as well.
Absolutely, yes. And I know we've just over time, but we've just got a couple of questions, so some of them can be answered quite quickly. Someone's asked how they can make their answer more concise, and for that, I just use the STAR technique, because that's a really, really good way of making your answers more clear and concise. What do you think, Penny?
Yeah, absolutely. The STAR technique's really, really a useful framework for answering questions, but also just try and be prepared. Try to anticipate what you think they're going to ask you, and just having that confidence that you've got a few examples ready to use if you're asked a question about, working in a team or particular sort of technical question or sort of expertise. You've got that there to fall back on.
Absolutely. And there are so many questions. I don't think we'll have a chance to go through them all, but if there is anything that you you wanted to ask but hasn't been covered, please just drop us an email at careers.info@manchester.ac.uk. But just to finish really, I spotted quite a good question here about after the interview. Should you reach out to the interviewer on LinkedIn or other social media to thank them for the opportunity?
I would say, this is my personal opinion, I would discourage it. It looks a bit presumptuous, so I would probably discourage it personally. Don't know. Would you have a different opinion, Jenny?
No, I totally agree. Yeah, I again, it's just personal sort of preference, but I think it's okay when you hear back from them. If you obviously you hear back from them and they say have rang or emailed you to say that you've been offered the job, of course you can say, oh, this is great, thanks. If they get back to you by email and say that you haven't been offered the job, it's okay to reply and say thank you so much for the opportunity anyway. But yeah, I wouldn't take it upon yourself to connect with them or sorry, to message them privately after the interview. And I guess that's what we have time for.
Just really quickly add, sorry, Jenny, there was a question there about the psychometric session that's happening straight away after this. So it will be recorded. So if you can't attend today, it will be recorded and uploaded to the YouTube channel. So you can still access that. And there was just a quick question about some of the codes not working. I suspect that might be your device, or if you're using your device and you can't access the QR code. So again, when this is uploaded to the YouTube channel, you should be able to access that there. But all of the links are on either to the website or to the YouTube channel. Thank you, Jenny. That's me now.
Oh, yes, me too. There are a couple of others that I'm trying to just answer. But yes, please do get in touch if there's anything that we haven't managed to ask about. But thank you so much for everyone's time today.
Yeah, thanks for everyone's contributions. Some really great questions there. In addition to the careers.info email address, we do have a web chat as well. So that's something where you kind of get an instant response to on our career service page. So someone there, if it's a sort of quite simple question, should be able to answer that for you as well. Okay, so we're going to wind up the webinar now then. Thank you so much for participating and your attention. And please do reach out to Jenny and I on LinkedIn. We're both on LinkedIn, we're both pretty active, so feel free to connect. And I'd encourage you to connect with any of your careers consultants on LinkedIn. And yeah, just reach out for help and support if you need it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.